The hot Texas wind whipped across the private airstrip on the outskirts of Austin, carrying dust and the sharp scent of jet fuel. A small turboprop aircraft sat motionless on the tarmac like a wounded bird, its engine cowling, wide-open wires exposed, and the acrid smell of burnt oil hanging heavy in the air. Claire Whitmore stood beside it, her tailored black blazer already dusted with grit, her blonde hair pulled into a tight professional knot. At 30 years old, she was the face of a groundbreaking medical project that could save thousands of lives in rural New Mexico. But right now, her green eyes were filled with something far more dangerous than exhaustion, desperation. The airport manager wiped sweat from his brow, shaking his head. 6 certified A&P mechanics stood around the plane, tools scattered at their feet. "Ma'am, we've called every specialist we know. They all say the same thing. The engine has to be removed and sent back to the manufacturer. Minimum 2 weeks. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper barely audible over the wind. 2 weeks will bankrupt an entire project. I have a signing tomorrow morning in New Mexico that will secure funding for the next 3 years. If I don't make that flight, everything collapses." One of the mechanics crossed his arms. "It's not about money, ma'am. We can't risk it. The engine seized mid-taxi. I wouldn't let anyone fly this thing." The group fell silent. No one had a solution. At the far edge of the runway, an old, battered pickup truck rumbled to a stop. A man stepped out mid-30s wearing a faded gray t-shirt stained with grease jeans worn at the knees and work boots that had seen better years. Jack Miller ran a hand through his messy brown hair and scanned the scene with calm, practiced eyes. The airport manager frowned. "Sir, this is a restricted area." Jack raised a hand, cutting him off politely but firmly. "I was called out to fix a tractor at the farm down the road." "Heard the plane die. Mind if I take a look?" 10 minutes. One of the mechanics let out a short laugh. "We're A&P certified. Who exactly are you?" Jack didn't argue. He simply walked over to the aircraft, crouched down, and began his inspection. He sniffed the fuel lines, ran his fingers along the hoses, checked connections with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life making broken things work again. Then he asked one simple question. "Who changed the fuel filter?" Last silence. Jack reached in, loosened a line, and let a small amount of liquid drain into a rag he pulled from his back pocket. Clear fluid mixed with unmistakable streaks of water. He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Water in the fuel. Not a dead engine, just a clogged system. Before anyone could protest, Jack moved with quiet efficiency. Tools appeared in his hands as if they had always belonged there. 10 minutes later, he stepped back. "Try it." The head mechanic started to object. "We can't just..." Claire looked at Jack, then at the silent aircraft that held her entire future. "Start it." The propeller turned once, twice. Then it roared to life, clean, strong, and steady. The entire tarmac went dead quiet. Claire stood frozen, staring at the man who had just done in 10 minutes what 6 certified professionals couldn't. Jack wiped his hands again, already turning toward his truck. "Done." "Don't use that fuel truck anymore," Claire called after him, her voice urgent. "Wait, what's your name?" Jack glanced back over his shoulder, his voice tired but steady. "Jack." Claire watched him walk away, her eyes fixed on the grease-stained hands that had just saved everything she had built. A poor single father with no certification, no fancy tools, no reason to help a stranger, and yet he had. How did a man like that fix what everyone else said was impossible? And who was he really? If you want to know why this single dad's 10 minutes would completely change Claire's life, stay with me. Claire stood frozen on the tarmac, the roar of the newly revived engine still echoing in her ears. The man who had just performed a miracle in 10 minutes was already walking back toward his battered pickup truck as if saving a multi-million-dollar aircraft was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Wait," she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. "What's your name?" He paused, one hand on the truck door, and glanced back over his shoulder. His face was tired, streaked with grease, but his eyes were steady. "Jack," he said simply. Before she could say anything more, he opened the passenger door. Inside the cab, a little girl around 8 years old sat waiting, her legs swinging slightly as she clutched a worn backpack. She had the same warm brown eyes as her father and a small, curious smile. Claire's breath caught. A single dad, fixing planes on the side while raising a child. Jack leaned in and said something quietly to the girl. She nodded, then waved shyly at Claire through the open window. Claire took a step forward. "Jack, please, let me at least thank you properly. Come inside the lounge for a minute. It's air-conditioned. You and your daughter can cool off." Jack hesitated, glancing at his grease-stained shirt and then at the elegant private terminal behind her. He looked uncomfortable, as if the idea of stepping into that polished world made him feel out of place. "I don't want to track oil on your floors," he said quietly. The simple honesty of the statement hit Claire harder than she expected. In her world, people worried about appearances, contracts, and status. This man was worried about dirtying someone else's carpet. "It's just a floor," she replied softly. "Please." Jack looked at his daughter again. The little girl gave him an encouraging nod. Finally he sighed and closed the truck door. 10 minutes, he said. "Then we have to go." Inside the private lounge, the air was cool and quiet, a sharp contrast to the blazing Texas heat outside. Soft leather couches, fresh flowers, and a large window overlooking the runway. Emma's eyes widened as she stepped in, taking in the luxury with open wonder. "Dad, this place looks like a movie," she whispered, her small hand still holding her father's. Jack stood awkwardly near the entrance, clearly uneasy about sitting down in his work clothes. Claire noticed the way he kept his boots carefully on the edge of the rug, as if afraid to leave a mark. She walked over to the refreshment counter and poured 2 glasses of cold water and 1 small juice box she found in the mini-fridge. When she handed the juice to Emma, the girl's face lit up. "Thank you, ma'am," Emma said politely, clutching the box like it was a treasure. Claire smiled. "You can call me Claire." Jack accepted the water with a quiet nod, but didn't drink right away. He stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his hands still bearing the marks of hard work, calloused, stained with grease that no quick wash could fully remove. Claire studied him for a moment. There was something about Jack Miller that didn't fit the image of a simple mechanic. His posture was straight, almost military. His movements were precise, and the way he had diagnosed the fuel issue in second, that wasn't beginner knowledge. "You said you were fixing a tractor nearby," she said gently. "But you knew exactly what was wrong with the turboprop engine. Most mechanics wouldn't touch without certification." Jack shrugged, looking down at his boots. "I used to work on aircraft, a long time ago. Air Force, back when I was young. Learned a few things." Claire tilted her head. "And now I fix whatever pays the bills," he answered simply. There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet acceptance. Tractors, trucks, generators, whatever people need. Emma piped up from her seat, swinging her legs. Dad fixes everything. He even fixed my bike when the chain broke. And he made me a bookshelf from old wood. Jack gave his daughter a small, tired smile. Emma let the lady have some quiet, but Claire shook her head. No, it's okay. I like hearing about it. She paused, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment he fixed her plane. Why did you stop the Air Force, I mean? Jack's expression tightened for a split second. He looked at Emma, who was now happily sipping her juice before answering. Life changed direction, he said quietly. My wife, she got sick, needed me home more. Then, after she passed, I had Emma to raise alone, couldn't keep the schedule the military demanded. So I left. Been doing civilian work ever since. The words were spoken without self-pity, but Claire heard the weight behind them. A man who had given up a career he clearly loved to take care of his daughter. A man who still showed up to fix a stranger's plane on his way home from another job. Claire felt something shift inside her chest. In her world, people paid others to solve their problems. Jack solved them himself even when it wasn't his responsibility. Before she could say anything more, Emma suddenly stood up and walked over to Claire, holding out her small hand. Do you want to see the picture I drew on the plane ride here? She asked, her voice full of innocent trust. Claire smiled and took the crumpled drawing. It showed a stick-figure family, a tall man, a little girl, and a woman with wings standing under a bright sun. That's beautiful, Claire said softly. Who's the woman with wings? Emma beamed. That's my mom. Dad says she's watching us from heaven. She has wings now, so she can fly wherever she wants. Jack looked away for a moment, his jaw tight. Claire felt her throat tighten. This man was raising his daughter alone, carrying grief every single day, and still found the kindness to stop for a stranger in trouble. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Please, she said, holding it out to Jack. Let me pay you for your time. It's the least I can do. Jack shook his head immediately. I didn't do it for money. I know, Claire replied. That's exactly why I want to give it to you. He looked at the envelope, then at his daughter, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. For a long moment, pride and need warred across his face. Finally, he gently pushed the envelope back toward her. Keep it, he said quietly. Buy your project whatever it needs. I fixed the plane because it needed fixing, not because I wanted anything in return. Claire stared at him, stunned. In her world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. But this man, this exhausted single father with grease on his hands and worry in his eyes, had just turned down money he clearly needed. Before she could respond, Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. Dad, can we go home now? I'm hungry. Jack nodded, ruffling his daughter's hair. Yeah, kiddo. Let's get you some dinner. As they walked toward the door, Claire called after him one last time. Jack. Thank you. Really. He paused at the threshold, turning just enough to meet her eyes. Safe flight, Claire, he said. Then he was gone, the old pickup rumbling away into the Texas dusk, leaving Claire standing alone in the quiet lounge with a heart that suddenly felt far too full. She looked down at the envelope still in her hand, then out the window at the plane that was now ready to fly because of a man who asked for nothing. For the first time in years, Claire Whitmore wondered what it would feel like to know someone who didn't want anything from her except to be kind. The next morning, Claire returned to the small private airstrip before sunrise. The turboprop stood ready on the tarmac, its engine now purring smoothly after Jack's repair. But Claire wasn't thinking about the flight to New Mexico. She was thinking about the man who had fixed it. She found him near the maintenance hangar loading tools into the back of his old pickup. Jack looked exhausted, his shoulders heavy from another long night shift. Emma sat in the passenger seat half asleep with her head against the window, clutching a small backpack. Jack Claire called, walking toward him. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag. For a moment, something guarded flickered across his face. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, stopping a few feet away. "And I have a proposal. The airport needs a temporary maintenance consultant for the next few weeks while we upgrade the systems. It's good pay. You'd be helping keep these planes safe." Jack shook his head before she could finish. "I appreciate the offer, but no," Claire blinked. "Why not? You clearly know what you're doing." "Because people would talk," he said quietly, glancing at his daughter in the truck. "They'd say I only got the job because I helped the rich lady with the broken plane. I don't want Emma hearing that her dad is just riding someone else's success. I fix things because they need fixing, not for favors." Claire felt the weight of his words. In her world, opportunities were currency. Here, pride was. Before she could respond, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside them. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, Richard Hale, mid-40s, sharp features, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He was one of the lead investors waiting for Claire to sign over the airfield so he could flip it for quick capital. Claire Richard said smoothly, ignoring Jack completely. "The contracts are ready. We closed this morning and the project in New Mexico is secured. But we need to move fast." His gaze finally slid to Jack, taking in the grease-stained clothes, the old truck, and the sleeping child inside. "Careful," Claire Richard added, with a thin smile. "People like him are very good at smelling money." Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He simply closed the tailgate of his truck and opened the driver's door. "Jack, wait," Claire started, but he was already sliding behind the wheel. "Have a safe flight, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. The truck rumbled to life and pulled away, leaving Claire standing in the dust. By midday, the rumors had already begun to spread through the small airfield community like wildfire. "Did you hear Claire Whitmore is getting cozy with some local handyman? He probably saw her money from a mile away. Single dad with a kid classic move." Jack heard the whispers when he returned later that afternoon to pick up a part he'd left behind. He stood frozen near the hangar door as two mechanics laughed quietly about the poor guy trying to climb the ladder with a rich woman's help. That evening, back in their small trailer on the edge of town, Jack sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of unpaid bills. Emma climbed into his lap, resting her head against his chest. "Dad, why are you sad?" she asked softly. Jack swallowed hard. "Because some people think your dad is a bad person, just because we don't have much money." Emma frowned, her small hands clutching his shirt. "But you're the best dad. You fix everything. You help people even when you're tired." Jack hugged her tighter, but inside the weight pressed down harder. He couldn't let his daughter grow up hearing those whispers. He couldn't let her feel ashamed of the life they had built together. The next morning he made a quiet decision. When Claire called to check on the plane's final inspection, he let the call go to voicemail. When she texted asking if he could look at another minor issue, he replied with a short, polite message. Sorry, too busy with other jobs right now. He started avoiding the airfield entirely. Claire felt the distance immediately. She sat in her temporary office at the airfield, staring at her phone, the weight of Richard's pressure growing heavier by the hour. He had given her an ultimatum: sign the sale papers for the airfield within 48 hours, or the bank would call in an old loan that could sink her entire medical project in New Mexico. Her lawyers and the board had already warned her any public scandal, any hint of personal entanglement with a local worker would scare off the major donors. The project that could bring health care to thousands of rural families was hanging by a thread. Richard leaned against her desk that afternoon, his smile cold. Think carefully, Claire. One wrong move with that handyman and the whole deal collapses. You don't want to lose everything over a man who fixes tractors for a living, do you? Claire looked out the window toward the empty spot where Jack's truck had been parked the day before. She didn't answer. The clock was ticking. 48 hours until the deadline. And somewhere across town in a small trailer, Jack Miller was teaching his daughter how to change a flat tire, trying to convince himself that staying away from Claire Whitmore was the right thing to do. The night before the 48-hour deadline, a violent Texas storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked across the sky like gunfire, and rain hammered the airfield in thick, blinding sheets. Inside the main hangar, water poured through a leaking roof, pooling around electrical panels. Sparks began to fly from overloaded circuits as the backup generators struggled. Jack was driving home from a late repair job, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour, when he saw the flashes of orange light coming from the hangar where Claire's turboprop was parked. He slammed on the brakes. Without hesitation, he spun the wheel and raced toward the hangar. Inside, the situation was worsening fast. Rainwater had shorted the main electrical panel. Flames were licking up the side of a fuel cart near Claire's plane. The entire building could go up in minutes. Jack burst through the side door, rain streaming off him. He didn't stop to think. He sprinted to the main breaker box, yanked it open, and slammed the master switch down. The sparks died instantly. Then he grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher and attacked the growing flames on the fuel cart, foam hissing as it smothered the fire. Claire's car skidded to a stop outside just as the last flames went out. She ran in, soaked to the skin, eyes wide with panic. "Jack!" she cried, seeing him standing in the middle of the chaos chest, heaving arms covered in foam and soot. "What are you doing here?" He lowered the extinguisher, breathing hard. "I saw the sparks from the road. Couldn't just drive past." Before either of them could say another word, headlights cut through the rain. Richard Hale stepped out of his Mercedes umbrella in hand, a cold smile on his face. "Well, well," Richard said, strolling in as if the storm didn't exist. The handyman strikes again. Saving the princess right on schedule, he looked Jack up and down, eyes full of contempt. "Claire, don't you find it a little too convenient? Every time something goes wrong, this guy magically appears." Claire's face was pale exhaustion, and stress carved deep into her features. The pressure of the deadline, the investors, the fear of losing everything she had built finally cracked something inside her. She turned to Jack, voice trembling. "Jack, are you doing all this because you know I'm rich, The words landed like a slap. Jack went completely still. The fire extinguisher slipped from his hand and clattered to the concrete floor. For the long moment he just stared at her, rain dripping from his hair, pain flashing raw across his face. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I understand now." He bent down, picked up his toolbox, and started walking toward the exit without another word. "Jack, wait." Claire reached out, but he kept moving. Outside, in the pouring rain, a small figure came running from the direction of the old pickup truck Jack had left at the gate. Emma soaked in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, don't go!" she screamed, throwing herself in front of him. "You taught me good people. Don't run when others need help." She turned to Claire, her small voice shaking with anger and hurt. "You're rich, but you're still scared of being tricked. But my dad is poor and he still dares to save people. If my dad is bad, then I don't want to grow up anymore." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She stood frozen in the rainwater, mixing with the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. At that exact moment, an old man limped into the hangar holding a small wooden box. It was Mr. Carlson, the longtime warehouse manager who had worked at the airfield since Claire's father built it. "I found this in the old storage vault," Mr. Carlson said, his voice cutting through the storm. "Been gathering dust for years." "Thought you should see it, Miss Whitmore." He opened the box. Inside were yellow documents and a single sheet of paper with the familiar signature at the bottom. Claire's father's. The heading read, "Jack Miller, beneficiary of maintenance contract share 5%. Dated 12 years earlier when Jack had served in the Air Force on a joint training project at this very airfield. Claire's father had personally signed it as compensation after Jack helped prevent a major fuel fire that could have destroyed the entire facility. Richard Hale's face went deathly pale. Claire stared at the paper, then at Jack, her voice barely a whisper. "Jack, you have legal rights here." Jack looked at the document, genuine shock on his face. "I never knew," he said quietly. "I only came because I heard the plane was dying." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the hangar everything had changed. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the airfield glistening under a pale Texas sun. Claire stood in the boardroom documents spread across the long table. Richard Hale sat across from her, his usual smirk gone, replaced by tight-lipped fury. The independent audit had finished overnight. The contract Richard had pushed so aggressively was riddled with hidden penalties and unfavorable clauses designed to strip the airfield of its value. Claire's legal team had frozen the sale. The project in New Mexico was safe. Richard leaned forward, voice low. "You're making a mistake, Claire." "Over what?" "Some local mechanic." Claire met his eyes without flinching. "No, I'm making things right." She signed the final papers that canceled the deal, then turned to the room full of staff and pilots who had gathered. "One more thing," she said clearly. "The man who saved my plane 2 days ago wasn't performing a miracle. He was simply doing what he has always done, helping when no one else would. His name is Jack Miller, and he deserves to be recognized." A quiet ripple of applause moved through the room. Not polite clapping. Real respect. Later that afternoon, Claire drove alone to the edge of town. She parked a respectful distance from Jack's trailer and walked the rest of the way, her heels sinking slightly into the damp ground. She carried no briefcase, no envelope of money, only a simple white folder. Jack opened the door before she could knock. His face was guarded eyes, tired from the long night. Claire stayed on the bottom step, not stepping up, respecting the space he needed. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. "Not for offering help, but for the question I asked you in the hangar. I was scared and under pressure, and I let that fear speak instead of trusting what I already knew about you. I was wrong. Deeply wrong." Jack remained silent, one hand still on the doorframe. Claire continued, voice steady but soft. "I'm not here to fix anything with money. I'm here because I hurt someone who only ever showed me kindness." From inside the trailer, Emma's small voice called out, "Dad, who is it?" Emma appeared behind her father, still in her pajamas, eyes widening when she saw Claire. Claire knelt down to Emma's level, holding out the white folder. "This is for you, sweetheart. It's an invitation to the summer STEM camp at the airfield. It's fully paid through a community scholarship. No one's name is on it except yours. Your dad didn't ask for it. I didn't buy it. It's yours because you deserve it." Emma looked at the folder, then up at her father, uncertain. Jack's jaw tightened. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Claire said, rising slowly. "But I wanted Emma to have something her father's hard work helped protect. The airfield is staying open because of what you did that day." Jack stared at the folder in his daughter's hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this last night," he said, his voice low. "Didn't sleep much anyway." He opened it. Inside lay a simple wooden ring, beautifully carved and sanded smooth. On the inside, band, tiny letters spelled, one word, Emma. Claire's breath caught. Jack slipped the ring onto her finger with careful hands. "I'm not proposing to change your life," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to fix mine. I want Emma to grow up knowing that good people can be loved without having to be rich or powerful. That kindness still matters." Tears slipped down Claire's cheeks. Jack looked at her, his own eyes glistening. "If one day you get tired of your world, remember there's a small hangar here and 2 father and daughter. Always keep the door open for you." Claire could no longer hold back the sob that broke from her chest. She didn't throw herself into his arms. She simply stood there, letting the tears fall, honoring the dignity he had fought so hard to keep. At that moment, Emma ran forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. "So, does this mean Miss Claire is staying for pancakes tomorrow?" Claire laughed through her tears, pulling Emma close. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm staying." Jack looked down at the 2 of them, his daughter and the woman who had walked into their lives covered in nothing but rain and courage, and for the first time in years the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He wasn't saving a millionaire. She wasn't saving a poor man. They were simply 2 people choosing each other exactly as they were. And in that small trailer on the edge of Austin under the quiet Texas sky, a new family began, not because of money or power, but because one man stopped for 10 minutes and changed everything.